Hey everybody, what's going on? This is Matt, and today I want to talk about lessons that I've learned in 2020 in language learning. And this is something that I do every year. I like to just take inventory on what happened and try to take those lessons into the new year with my language learning. So I thought it'd be useful to just kind of share some of the things that were kind of big points, big takeaways for me. And so hopefully you can take these ideas and apply them in your own language learning into the new year. So probably, the first thing I want to talk about is this idea of falling off of your habit or your routine with language learning. This is the first one I wanted to talk about. And it's not necessarily a new idea for me, but it's just kind of one of those things where, it happens to you a couple of times throughout the year and it reinforces this idea. It just makes it even more of that message becomes even more powerful. It reinforces it. So, I was very consistent with language learning this year. I was very happy with it. But there were points of time where, something came up, life got busy, and it got disrupted for a couple of days in a week or something like that. And, even when you're being very consistent, it's very easy to fall off. It's a lot harder to get that momentum back. So, I found myself in those kind of brief periods of time where, things got busy and I couldn't put in the time that I wanted to into language learning. You have just a little bit less motivation. It's a little bit harder to kind of put in that hour that you want to do every single day. And so, it's kind of this very slippery slope aspect where if you're not careful, it can slowly go downhill further and further. So luckily I was able to overcome that and get back into my habit, get back into my routine, not really with any problems, but I think that any time where I take a slight break or life gets busy and I have to kind of adjust things, I do notice that routine and momentum factor kind of creep in. So it's something that I'm always cognizant of and I try to be aware of, as I go about learning a language. And then on the same side of things too, I also noticed that there was these periods of time where I just kept ramping my language learning up. I was putting in a ton of hours into language learning, and it was just so much easier, right? It's so easy to just tackle on more time, to read more, to listen more. So the momentum goes both ways. It can go in the the bad direction, right, where you're putting in less time, you're less motivated, or it can go in the opposite direction. So it's not necessarily a new idea for me, but I think that the idea of momentum, of trying to be super consistent and have that routine in as best as you can is really important. And obviously, things happen, right? Life gets busy, but it's important, I think, to try to just ensure that consistency and that routine as much as you possibly can. I think that's pretty vital. So another lesson that was a big takeaway this year was the idea of just humbleness with language learning. Honestly, every single year that I do languages, I think I'm more and more humbled by the just the process of learning a language, because every time every month that you learn a language, every year you start to realize the vastness of the languages that you learn. There's just so many words out there. There's so many grammar nuances. There's so many ways to get better, to have more accuracy. And I think that kind of a big sign of someone that kind of takes a more mature approach with language learning is this kind of realization that, there is never necessarily this ending point with language learning, right? You can always get more words under your belt. You can always get better at grammar or make less mistakes or whatever it is. But I think that there's this humbleness aspect, right? There's no end point where things just end. And I think that a lot of beginners kind of think that way. They think that, okay, I'm going to put in all this time for 2 years, 1 year, and I'm done. But really, there's always more to go. There's always more to do, and it's not something to be, I guess, it's not something to be intimidated by or discouraged by. But I think it's just this kind of very humbling, experience, right? And I feel it pretty much every single year, right? Where you realize that there's so much that you can learn in just one language. So it's not to say don't go and explore other languages, or if you want to try out another language, don't do that. But I think that it's just that humbleness that is just a lesson for me every single year. And another way I think to think about it is that there's just so much that you can learn in one programming language, for example, or there's so much that you can learn in one musical instrument, right? There's this intense depth to just kind of one idea. And so I think when you're learning a language and the further along you go, you realize this. And I think for this year, it really is, no different. Another lesson that was a big takeaway for me was just the idea of really concentrated learning, concentrated effort on a particular subject. I did this a couple of times this year with listening and speaking, where you just put a ton of time into practice your speaking or practice your listening. And I really do think it is a awesome way to go if you want to get better at a particular skill. If you're struggling with listening, just put in a ton of time into that. Put a ton of energy and look at strategies and tactics on how to approach it so you can get better at that particular skill. Or speaking, right? Practice speaking all the time. Practice shadow speaking. Get a bunch of conversation partners. I think that concentrated effort really is very significant. I think that a lot of times, it's very easy to kind of fall in this trap where you want to do a little bit of everything, right? A little bit of grammar, a little bit of listening, a little bit of vocabulary, etc. And maybe that makes a lot of sense, but sometimes, in my opinion, it really does pay off to just have a lot of focused effort on one thing or two things, and you can get a lot of gains, especially in an area where you're going to get the most value for your time. So I think that's very significant. And then kind of the last lesson that I wanted to talk about is to not lose focus in sight of the end goal. I think that this was kind of very this came up for me this year, and it also applied, I think, to a lot of things even outside of language learning, where it's very easy sometimes to lose sight of the end goal, right, or why you're doing things. When you're deep into learning a language, you kind of get to this point sometimes where you're just in that daily routine, that weekly routine, day in, week out. And you're just doing flashcards every single day, or maybe you're practicing listening every single morning, or you have your weekly conversation partner or something like that. It's very easy to kind of just get stuck into this trance-like state, or just to be focused in on these kind of the building blocks of your end goal. And sometimes things can happen in life, and just you feel maybe a little bit less motivated, a little bit less driven. You're questioning things. And I think sometimes it's worthwhile to just take a step back and really ask yourself, okay, why was I learning this language? What was my passion for this language? Why was I doing these certain activities, right? Why was I trying to practice reading or whatever it is? And I think sometimes just taking that step back and connecting with your why, connecting with the bigger reasons for doing things is helpful, because that can be the key ingredient behind the motivation you need, or just kind of that comfort that you're going in the right direction. And it doesn't just it's not just for language learning. I think it applies to so many areas of your life. But I think it's important to just kind of have your eyes on the bigger picture, the bigger goal, your why you're doing certain things. And for me, that was pretty big. So that's just a couple of things that I took away from 2020 in my language learning. Let me know what you think. What are some things that you learned this year that you hope to apply to into the new year with your language learning? And I'll see you in the next video. Take care.